Welcome to First in Fiction, your first stop for learning to write fantastic fiction. I am your host, Aaron Gansky, author of The Bargain, the Hand of Adonai series, and Firsts in Fiction.
And I'm his cohort in crime, Alton Gansky, the author of 45 books, 25, 27, something like that, are novels. So always good to be chatting fiction with people interested in fiction.
Indeed, indeed. So how's your week been, Pops?
Well, I'm tired today. I had to put in a full day's work, and I'm not used to that, you know. Working for a private client and then trying to get some other things done, too. So been one of those detailed things where your eyes begin to fall out. All you do is look at the book and a computer screen and stuff like that. But I tell you what, it's a lot better than hot mopping roofs when it's 102 outside. So I try not to complain.
Absolutely, absolutely. Same here, busy week for me, trying to get the classroom situated and clearing out the classroom. I've taken a new position at a different school, and so cleaning out my classroom was quite the ordeal, bit of a challenge, and always some emotion tied with that. I've been with that school for 11 years, so kind of like leaving family in a way. So I'm excited for the new opportunity in front of me, but there's always that kind of bittersweet regret of having to leave someplace that you love for hopefully something that's going to be better. So but I've been getting my writing in, so that's always good. And speaking of writing, we've got our First Line Friday winner this week from a frequent submitter, first time winner. So and this is a former student of mine, Katie Osborne. For her line, "You can probably guess that I'm not much of a storyteller." So what I like about that is I like the direct address to the reader, how it immediately pulls the reader in, pulls the audience in, and creates kind of that kind of conversational tone. And while it doesn't, and there's nothing completely unexpected with it, I do like that it establishes kind of the tone and the character for the novel that's going to come.
Yeah, inserts the novelist into the story with that. One thing that might have been another option is to say, you may find out that I'm not much of a storyteller. Since it's the first line, there's no way a reader's going to know that whether or not the person's a good storyteller or not. But I'm thinking I probably would have gone with, you may find out I'm not much of a storyteller.
Yeah. But, kind of preserve that voice as well and just tinker a little bit with the words. That's what we find with these first lines is it's very tough to find the perfect first line, and you'll get something that's really close and you'll tinker with it 4, 5, 6 times till you really get what's best there. So so a good first line there. So Katie Osborne, congratulations. You'll be in the July drawing for the $15 gift card, which should be happening before too much longer. July coming to a close pretty rapidly, so stay tuned for that. And now we can ship it back over to you, Pops, for our publishing term of the day.
Sure. Oh, I just want to let people know that if they've been following the Harbinger series, book 6 is out. This is the Frank Peretti book. Let's see if I can get it so there's not too much light on it. I just got my copy last night, the physical copy of it, but you can also get it as a Kindle book. That's the Frank Peretti one called Infestation. Infestation. Sounds like my first apartment. Infestation. So that's out there. And then also I did a little blog post comparing writers to magicians. So you can see that at the Blue Ridge site, BRMCWC, Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference, BRMCWC. And you can see what I have going there. The term for today, I don't think we've used this one, is legacy publisher. Legacy publisher. You'll hear that from time to time. I was reminded of it reading a blog post from my agent. So what is a legacy publisher? Well, right now we're distinguishing between traditional publishers and self-publishers, our small press publishers. A legacy publisher is another term for an established traditional publisher, somebody who's been around for a while. So you think of Random House. By the way, Aaron, do you know why Random House is called Random House?
I do, and I think you laid the knowledge on me, but they would publish pretty much anything, and so it was kind of random what they published. It wasn't one specific genre or field. It was just pretty much anything that caught their fancy.
Yeah, Bennett Cerf was one of the founders. If you watch really old game shows, What's My Line? is he was on that for a long time. He's one of the founders of Random House, and they called it Random House because they didn't know what they were going to publish next. They published at random. But anyway, a legacy publisher like Random House, Simon Schuster, some of the others are often called legacy publishers or traditional publishers. The term traditional publisher has become very prevalent because it defines and distinguishes them from other forms of publishers like small publishers or alternate forms of publishers. A traditional publisher is going to offer a contract, they're going to offer an advance, they're going to edit your book for you, they're going to typeset the book, they're going to do the cover art, they're going to do all of those things and pay you a royalty off it. That's what a traditional does. Non-traditional publisher may publish your book, but they may not offer, well, they should offer a contract. To be very careful if they didn't offer you one, but they may not offer a typical contract. They probably won't offer an advance or very little advance. Royalty are spread out differently than others. So there's traditional against non-traditional publishers, and another term for traditional is a legacy publisher, meaning they've been around for a while. So what they used to call I think they used to call them the Big Seven, and they became the Big Six because they keep acquiring each other, and then I think it's down to the Big Five now, New York houses, and those are legacy publishers.
Excellent. So very interchangeable with traditional.
Yeah, for the most part, probably the only nuance to it is that there's some history. They're an established publishing company, not one that was started last month. But because you could have one started last month and still be traditional in the way that they approach things. But
sure,
now traditional legacy are pretty much used interchangeably.
Right, but legacy still has that to it. So,
right.
Right, distinguishing between the big houses and the smaller houses and the longevity of it. I like that term, legacy. It's very flattering, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. Pretty soon we'll start saying we're legacy authors, because we've gone the traditional route. So it does
absolutely
have a little air of importance to it.
Absolutely. And that's fine, right? We can be proud of ourselves, You might refer to yourself as a legacy author. I wouldn't be able to. My publisher is not a legacy publisher, more of a non-traditional publisher, which, by the way, I'm very happy with. I've been very happy with the publishing experience that I've had on this side. I don't know if they would call themselves a traditional publisher. They don't pay in advance. They still pay in royalties, but they don't pay in advance. They still have contracts and all that. But they really make use of the digital publishing, the print on demand, all that kind of stuff. So it's a real good option for a smaller house, and I've been really happy with it. Yeah,
there have been many variations of that. There's been shared risk publishers where you share part of the risk. That usually means no advance, and you may not get any money back until they've earned back their money for the cover design and the other stuff. And then when there's actually profit, they can split it, depending who you're dealing with. So there's all kinds of variations of this and new things that have been tried with it, which is not bad. Sometimes we get the idea that the legacy publishing, the traditional publishing, is the way it has always been. Well, it's not. Mark Twain and Chuck Dickens, some people call him Charles. Chuck Dickens, yeah. Charles Dickens, and others, they often published in magazines in serial form, and then later those things would become books. So it hasn't always been the way it is today. Often these things would be tried out in magazines, and even the house that, one of the big houses, they used to have their own magazine, and they would publish some of their authors in that to get interest, and then the book would sell after that. So they were using it as a kind of a marketing tool. That. So publishing has always been changing. It's not just the way we see it. Yeah, absolutely. So you cut out a little bit there, but I think we got most of what you were saying. So we can move on, press forward here in our cast tonight, talking about Raymond Carver in a series that I like to call From the Writer for the Writer. And just kind of a quick little background again of what my idea is for this is several very well-known, well-respected writers have written about the craft of writing, and you've heard us do several shows, if you've been listening long, about different rules for writing fiction, many of them put together by guys like Kurt Vonnegut Jr., etc.
And so one thing that I did is I went through and found several of these articles, these essays written about writing by famous writers, and read through them and kind of annotated them, analyzed them a little bit, and listened to what they had to say about the author's journey in writing, how their writing has changed over time, what they think is the mark of good fiction, etc. So I've kind of wanted to package some of these together and for a couple of weeks spend some time looking at what some of our great writers have done in the past, and the advice that they've given to writers in our position, new writers, those who haven't published extensively. Pops, I'm sorry, you're kind of out of the question here, but actually that's not true, because you can always learn more about writing. You can always learn more.
Well, and that's really the key to being a writer. If you think you arrived, then your career is probably over. There's always something to learn, some new approach, and there's always some young pup that comes along and gets their first book published, and you go, this is really good. And so there's people to steal ideas from, and keeps you on your toes. As we go here, quickly just going to say hi to the room that's here with us. We got several folks that are watching live, and so we say hello to the room and stuff. Well, you picked Raymond Carver, and I'm just going to confess here, I don't know as much about Raymond Carver as perhaps I should. Why pick Raymond Carver?
I've long admired the work of Raymond Carver. He wrote Popular Mechanics, which I often reference as one of the most influential short stories I've read. It's flash fiction. It's less than 1,000 words, and it leaves an indelible mark on you, as Molly has said in the room already, that she's scarred for life after reading it. And it's one of those stories that just really, really sticks with you. But what I liked about his writing is just the power of it, how compact it was. Many would call him a minimalist, but he wasn't. He didn't remain a minimalist. And one of the things that we may talk about tonight, if we have a little bit of time toward the end, is his relationship with Gordon Lish, who was a very well-known and respected editor of the time, who worked very closely with Raymond Carver, essentially made Raymond Carver who he was. So Raymond Carver was just a beginning writer. Gordon Lish kind of took him under his wing, worked with him on several of his stories, and ended up getting one published, I believe, it was in the New York Times. And then since that time, he continued to publish and continued to publish. I believe, this is where I get really rusty, I believe it was in the 50s and 60s that he wrote predominantly. And I think he wrote on through the 70s and possibly even as late as the 80s. But he wrote predominantly short stories. And he's one of our most well-respected short story writers in American history. I studied him a lot at Antioch, and also in my undergrad at Cal State San Bernardino. So I've read several of his works and seen many different iterations of them, which is a lot of fun. As all good writers are, he was an alcoholic. I am joking about all good writers being alcoholics.
You may be closer to the truth than you know there. Writing has sent a lot of people to the bottle.
What?
Not me. No, I'm drinking water, but flavored water. But yeah, I understand.
Yeah. So his stories, as a result, were often very dark, very sparse, very, very subtle. What I really like about him is his ability to trust the reader, and he never insults the reader by giving them too much information. And I really like that. Eventually, go ahead, Pops. You're going to say something.
So when you say he's a minimalist and that his work is sparse, are you talking about the way he constructed his prose?
Yeah, think Hemingway. His style would be reminiscent of Hemingway's style, as opposed to, say, someone like F. Scott Fitzgerald, which is full of very long, complicated, complex sentences with just imagery flowing from every paragraph. His early work, at least, was a lot more gritty. It was kind of tooth and nail. It was just in there, in the moment, very short sentences, very Hemingway-esque. And he got kind of grouped together with that style for a long time. But interestingly enough, once he kicked the booze habit, he married, and his wife helped him kind of get that under control. And so once he overcame that and actually started finding some contentment in life and some happiness, he eventually broke his ties with Gordon Lish, and Lish had made Carver's entire career. But once Carver sobered up and started saying, well, I'm Raymond Carver, I've got my own reputation now, and I don't like the edits that you're making, so I'm going to publish things my own way, they kind of split off at that point. And what you'll notice about his stories at that point, they became a lot more imagery driven. There was a different flow. He's moved more toward the F. Scott Fitzgerald side, where the imagery and the kind of the longer, more complicated sentence structures, etc. And the stories were not nearly as dark. They weren't all about people failing, but there was some goodness, some hope that he found in them. So there's really kind of, he almost had two careers, and you'll find some people who are fans of early Carver and some who are fans of late Carver, but kind of an interesting little debate there. But what really kind of sparked this was he wrote an essay called On Writing, which I really, really enjoyed. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the things that I found in that essay, and we could kind of discuss a little bit about the implications of that.
Yeah, it sounds good. So he was writing in the 50s and the 60s?
I believe so.
Okay.
Yeah, somebody's probably going to Wikipedia that and give me a good answer in the room, perhaps, and make me look silly. But I welcome public correction. I'm used to it by now.
Well, that's what we live for. It's what we live for. Alrighty. Well, you've listed some things here in our show notes, our rundown, and so in this essay he says, "Get in, get out, don't linger, go on."
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, that's one of the quotes I really love. Speaking specifically of short fiction, but again, I think we can apply this to the long form as well. One of Kurt Vonnegut's 8 rules for writing fiction is start as close to the end as possible. And this is really what he's talking about here is don't spend 28 pages setting something up. Just start in medias res. We've heard that term before. Start in the middle. Get in, get out. Don't linger. Okay. So the thing that we also see here that we don't see with the starting in the middle is the get out quickly. Don't linger. Don't browbeat your reader. They get it. Mention it and then get out. And then move on to something else. Go on. So a short story for him, you get into it, you get out of it, and then you move on. And that's what a lot of his stories were really like. Some pretty powerful stuff there when you can do that. You're starting kind of that mid-conflict, but also ending early.
And I like the part where you said to start as close to the end as possible. Vonnegut was the one who said that?
Yeah, that was one of Vonnegut's 8 rules for writing fiction. Start as close to the end as possible.
Yeah, I'm just a little stuck here. I'm just so proud that my son just used Latin on a podcast about starting in the middle. I was just impressed with that.
Yeah, I know some Latin. I can say begin in the middle and save yourselves from hell, which is I think something I picked up from a movie. So my Latin is pretty extensive. It's pretty quality. Those are common phrases that you'll use when you're speaking with other Latin speakers.
Well, usually the first terms I learn in another language is "Where's the bathroom?" But
yeah,
okay,
same
so
thing.
Get in.
It's loosely translated.
Get in, get out, don't linger, meaning don't overwrite, and then go on, and go on to another scene, or even go on to another story.
Yeah, absolutely. Go on to another scene, go on to another chapter, go on to another story. I like that. Don't linger. This, I think you can see a lot in Lish's editing of his stuff. And this is something that I tell writers who don't know how to end their work. I just say, you've already written the ending. Just take out your last 2 or 3 pages. There's a great, oh man, I forget the writer now, but he submitted a short story and his printer didn't print the last page. And it was like a 5-page story. So like 20% of it, he sent into the publisher without realizing it, that he was missing the last page. And everybody said, this was your best ending yet. And then he realized, wait, where's the last page? But our instinct, I think, is to overwrite. And so that idea of not lingering, because we as writers, we want to linger. We want to make sure people understand what we're saying, what they do. We just need to trust that they do. So I like that
And you froze up there.
Photographs of particular moments. He's very good about capturing the emotional context of those moments.
Okay, yeah, you froze up there for a bit, so we lost about the middle of that, at least on my end. With that, yeah, that trimming down is very difficult, especially those of us that are familiar with and used to writing books. I was asked to write a 1,000-word short story, and so yeah, that's a challenge. I'll be glad to do that. And once I reached 5,000 words, I realized I had a problem because I was going to have to strike a lot, 2 or 3 words out of every 4 or 5, and get this thing down to size. And I had to make I don't know, I think I rewrote the thing 6 times or something. And I did that when I was asked to convert one of my books into a screenplay, which isn't nearly as long as a book. It's 120 pages, and they're not real pages. They get about 50% of the content on a film script page. So, and I think I had to work that one 8 times to get within the 120 page count for the screenplay. So it's a tough thing to do. But I think it made things better in the process of doing that. Well, Tess is telling us something here.
Okay.
Yeah, Tess is telling us that Raymond Carver was born in 1938, died in 1988. So, and added to the American short story literature in the 1980s. So his publications are from 1968 to 1987. Thank you, Tess, for making us look good and correcting Aaron publicly.
No. Yeah, that was the 50s. I knew it was too early. I knew I should have gone with 60s, but anyhow, late 60s. It's a few decades, not a big deal. I'm actually going to turn my camera off because I'm having some bandwidth issues, and I think that's what's causing some of the garbling. So I'm going to do that and hope that helps out. So if you don't see my lovely face moving, you can at least look at my lovely face not moving, those of you watching the video feed. So,
alrighty.
But yeah.
Okay, so you also make this comment that he wrote about normal life, interpersonal conflicts, and so his stories aren't resolved very often.
Yeah, very often they are not resolved, and I think that comes out with the get in, get out. The get out early, the don't linger. He didn't linger, and so he wrote about messy personal relationships, and those tend not to get tidied up, at least not in 1,000 words, and not even in 5,000 words. And so, what you'll find with a lot of his work is the endings he has a lot of open resolves. I think as a direct result of this philosophy of get in, get out, and not lingering. So, yeah, really quality stuff though. Really kind of captures the perspective of the human emotion, the whole range of human emotion, and he's able to find it in very mundane, ordinary situations, and he's able to translate those into something that's feels much, much bigger.
Alrighty, so. And when we say interpersonal issues, you mean like between husband and wife, family issues, success, failure, alcoholism, that kind of thing?
Yes, predominantly relationships, husband, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-wife, fiancés, those types of things. One of his most famous works is called What We Talk About When We Talk About Love. And this is going to shock you, but it's really just about people sitting around talking about love. So, but it's fantastic in how these 4 people view love in radically different ways. And so it's really interesting to see that 4 people talking about the same thing are generally not talking about the same thing. A lot of subtleties and nuances in it, which kind of has this idea of something that he says in On Writing, which is our next point here. He says, some writers have a bunch of talent. I don't know any writers who are without it, but a unique and exact way of looking at things and finding the right context for expressing that way of looking at something else. And for me, that's the difference between having talent in writing and having talent in observation, having a kind of a psychological understanding of human nature and finding the right context to highlight that kind of spectrum of human emotion, and finding it in the normal things. So you don't have to have, at least for Carver would say, you don't have to have spaceships and medieval castles and all these extravagant things. He says, you could have a husband and wife having coffee, and there can be every bit as much tension in that scene as there are if in a gunfight, let's say.
Yeah, and many of us want to default to that high-end action, where there's, like you say, a gunfight or volcanoes going off or Martians are landing or something like that. But he was seeing great conflict in just the everyday stuff.
Absolutely. There's a great, the Popular Mechanics story is a fine example in which you've got an argument between a husband and a wife. They're splitting up and they're arguing over the child. And it's heart-wrenching. It makes you sick to your stomach when you read it. But it's a pretty common occurrence, but the context of it is different. It's, more precise and compact, the way he views that. There's another one. If you're really interested in reading him and kind of studying him, he's got one called A Small Good Thing, or A Good Small Thing. But he's also published it as The Baker, and I think he published it as a third time in under a different title. I can't remember the third title, but you can kind of see the progression of it. You can see it going from very sparse to a lot more bloated and inflated, and then kind of back down again. But it's essentially about a boy who gets hit by a car. And the fallout from that within the family, and how that affects the family and how it affects everyone in the community. Just riveting stuff. And so not everything is kids dying. He also has a great story called Cathedrals, in which a blind man comes to stay with an ex-girlfriend, and her husband is learning to deal with the fact that this man is blind. I probably should have reread these stories beforehand, because now I feel like I'm misstating everything. The blind man did not date the wife previously. I think they were just friends. I haven't read that one in a while, but it's called Cathedrals. It's very, very interesting. That's one of his brighter stories, of kind of opening up and understanding people in a different way. So what better way to show that? I mean, you don't have to throw them on a spaceship together. You just have this man over for coffee or for tea. And then through the process of conversation, something unlocks inside the protagonist, who has no idea how to relate to a blind man at the get-go. So pretty interesting stuff there.
So the core of his writing, the motivation for his writing, is things that he's observed. He's making comments that writers, that voice and style begins with our observation. If you want to be different, if you want to have a unique voice, then you need to observe differently. Observe in a new way. What did he mean by all of that?
Well, again, it goes back to these common relationships and some of these, I guess, simple and mundane things. An argument between a husband and wife can seem simple and mundane, but the way he presents it, it becomes something more. What's the old saying that every family is unhappy, but every family is unhappy in their own way. No two families are unhappy in the same way. And a lot of times I get, these stories that I read from students or from new writers about, the drunk father that's abusing the child. Well, yeah, I've read this story a million times, but you're drawing from an archetype rather than, that real true personal experience, and really observing it and allowing yourself to sometimes feel the range of emotion that you want to write about, and so that you can do it more effectively and precisely. But he does it in such a way that it's different. It's not your typical, alcoholic husband, being left by his wife or whatever the case may be. These are all unique individual people. And so much of it draws from his personal experience, I think, but a lot of it is taking things that have impacted him and translating them into something else.
So we need to fine-tune our observation and then find story and and things that we experience, which isn't that unusual. I received many of my story ideas from something I've observed or been part of. The story has nothing to do with what I was a part of, not directly related to what I observed, but in it was a nugget of something that got my attention, and that started the whole chain of what ifs that fiction writers use. Well, what if this happened, then what would happen then, and then what if this? And that's happened to me a number of times without me knowing where the story was going to end up. So, I'd have to think about it some more and maybe make notes here and there and see if I couldn't get enough of a feel for it that the story would convince me that it was worth writing, that it was going to be able to have a beginning, middle, and end, even if it were short, but that, covered all those things. And if it did, then I would go on to write it.
Yeah, I agree with that. And what you're talking about is very much what like what he says a little bit later in On Writing. He says every great or even every very good writer makes the world over according to his own specifications. And so, like you say, you've got that nugget or that seed that you plant, and from that seed grows an entire world, a world of your own. I think of it in this context. If you were to go down to the airport and watch people, you ever people watch?
Mm-hmm.
You're a writer, so of course you people watch it. I love people watching, and then I just look for the most, I guess, out of the ordinary, the most unexpected kind of interactions, the most unexpected responses to things, and I look for the subtleties. So when somebody says, "How's your day?" and the other person says, "Good," clearly the body language says it's not good, and then I will kind of photograph that in my mind, not with an actual picture, because then that's something else entirely. It's a little bit illegal and spooky and creepy if you start taking pictures of people. However, if you can kind of capture that mental image and develop that, those people now become your characters. And so you're going to keep some stuff and you're going to change some stuff. And now they're not at the airport, they're at the bus station. And now he's not the one leaving, she is. And she's leaving for this reason. And even though it's something that started with some simple people watching, a very mundane situation, now from the story seed, it's growing and you are making the world over according to your own specifications.
And that would be true for genre writers, I suppose. They see something, and then if they're writing murder mysteries, they would then convert it. If they write speculative stuff, sci-fi, for example, they would contextualize it into the kind of stuff that they write with a what-if question, and then you get that unique perspective, I would think. You're talking about the airport. I kept wondering, when you go through security, you have to stand in these scanners that they send this little X-ray thing around you. And I wonder what would happen if you're next in line and the person in front of you got into one of those scanners. The scanner turns on and the person disappears. And the TSA agent calls for you next. Okay, I have no idea where that would go, but that's an idea of taking just something that is routine and twisting it into something else. Now, of course, that'd be more sci-fi kind of thing, but you could make it something entirely different, I suppose. Yeah,
and I do want to make a point here that even though Carver did not write sci-fi and fantasy or westerns or any romances, I don't think you'd call them romances, I don't think he was necessarily opposed to them. And I don't think that if you are a genre writer that his advice does not necessarily apply to you. As a matter of fact, I would say it applies even more to you with some of the things that he says. You still have to be able to have that own unique perspective. You still have to be able to remake the world in your own, according to your own visions. I'll use James Cameron as an example. Everyone, I think, on planet Earth saw his movie Avatar. Some of them saw it multiple times. That's Dances with Wolves in space, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, it is Ferngully in space. And so what he did was he created that world. And so it was a spectacle. It was nobody had seen CGI like that. And I think that was one of the first 3D movies. And so it was a pretty big deal in the media, but he took a common story and he let it grow into something else. He remade the world in his own image, if you will. So you can still do the genre stuff, but I would suggest that you want to perhaps deviate a little bit more from Dances with Wolves. I felt like Avatar was probably too close to that kind of a thing. But
Mm-hmm.
if you take the character and let the character develop too, and that it reshapes not just the world itself, but the characters themselves as well, I would say you're on the right track there.
You're right, and that's not all that unusual. Star Trek was from an old television program called Wagon Train, and what Gene Roddenberry did when he came up with the concept of Star Trek was he was going to do a wagon train in space, where you have different adventures each week, and so he just changed the milieu in which it happened, but it was basically the same thing. Individuals outside their element encountering unexpected things, and then conquering. So I suppose you could do that with any number of category fiction, any number of genres, whatever it happens to be your bailiwick on those things. So yeah, that isn't that unusual. It's that unique perspective, and that's what creativity is applying something new to that. Same thing with the old Lost in Space series was really Swiss Family Robinson. And also a variation of Robinson Crusoe. So changed some and changed the environment, new perspective.
Yeah, and I think the power of observation is really strong when we're looking at the world, but I don't want to say that we can't get inspiration from literature as well. But I think, again, as writers, we need to look at literature differently than everybody else. And we need to let that become the seed that grows, and we can transform those worlds and those characters as according to our own specifications. But that power of observation that we're talking about is not just for life. You can also use that same power of observation when you're looking at any sort of art, be it literature or paintings or sculptures or movies. You can still use those as story seeds as well.
All right, talk to us a little bit about this concept of experimentation. He has that great quote, "Too often experimentation is a license to be careless, silly, or imitative in writing. Even worse, a license to try to brutalize or alienate the reader." What was his view then from this essay on experimentation?
Well, I think I think that I put that in the show notes, first of all, because I agree with him 100%. I see a lot of experimental fiction coming across the Citron Review, people submitting to us very experimental pieces. And I feel very much the same way that he does, which is to say, if I could paraphrase, if you're writing a story in order to experiment with new and interesting ways to write literature, then you're probably doing it wrong. You're doing it for the wrong reasons. The story should never exist to fit a particular experimental form. Rather, the story should demand a form in which to be told. So the difference is this. I saw a great story that used footnotes. It was fiction, and it used footnotes. And the footnotes were all flash forwards. So Bob would say something, and there'd be like a little one next to it, and you would go down and read the footnote, and it would say, Bob would later marry so-and-so and have 6 kids and blah, 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 and just on and on. And what it did is it extended the story world for me. And it was really fantastic, and I really enjoyed that story, and it seemed unique. And then somebody submitted a story to us that was 1 sentence long. It was 1,000 words with 1 period. And at some point I thought, okay, well, you're doing this just because you want to show off how fancy you are and that you can write 1 really, really long sentence. But I don't understand, the grammar is now breaking down to a point where I can't understand it. So if you're experimenting by trying to be, sneaky and put in these fictional, footnotes, or, I read a story once that was in the form of a glossary or an index. Those can be fun kinds of things, but like he says, using experimentation as a license to be careless or silly or imitative is not a good way to do things. Brutalizing or alienating the reader is not a good thing. When it's tough to read because you can't follow what's going on because you want to be super awesome and not use any periods, that's problematic. But if you can pull it off and the story demands that form, the story says that it needs to be told in this form, then you can be, then go ahead, try something new. But just don't try something new just to try something new. Don't, worry about being on the bleeding edge of literature. Just let your writing speak for itself, not what you can, create, the forms that you can create, just the words. The words are all you have. He says later on, that's all we have finally are the words, and they'd better be the right ones. So you should focus more on the power of the writing rather than the form of the writing.
Or trying to be cutting edge rather than being good. All right.
Yeah. Trying to be fancy or tricky. It shouldn't, there should be no deceit in your writing. So, using a form, it should, again, support the story.
I've encountered that kind of writing from some newbies. Some are trying very hard. They're doing a good job. Others, you think, they're trying to show off the fact that they have a degree in English. Or they're imitative of someone else. There's no creativity in it. And then you come across the ones that are just stellar, that they found a unique voice and that story has a place, and they follow the story instead of trying to whip it into what they think the story ought to be. They tell the story in the best possible way so that they experience it themselves. The footnote thing got me thinking of Michael Crichton, who we've mentioned a few times, but I believe in his book Andromeda Strain, he footnotes the book, and it took me quite a while before I realized that all the footnotes were quotes and papers written by the characters in the book. So he's footnoting himself in it. And I just thought that was interesting because it gave it kind of an academic tone, that this is a well-researched book and he's having a little fun with us. Sorry, the footnote thing got me thinking about that. So
I think it's a great point, though. But again, it serves the story because he wanted that academic tone, right? And so adding those footnotes gave it that air of respectability and a little bit meta, a little bit of a breaking the fourth wall, if you will, and footnoting fictional characters. But would you say that was successful?
It was. At first I thought it was strange, but probably because I wasn't bright enough to realize that the name in the footnote was the protagonist. Where you give the name first and then the article. And then I realized what he was doing is he was not just telling a story, but he was kind of building a scientific framework around the story, even though he's making up a good bit of the information and making up the research and the articles that he's quoting. They didn't really exist except in the minds of the people who were just in his mind. The people didn't exist either. So, yeah, I found it very innovative. I don't know how many times you could do that, but he pulled it off. I'm a little
disappointed to hear that because now I'm worried that the next thing you're going to say is that that we haven't really cloned dinosaurs and that there's really not an island with a dinosaur park on it, and that would break my heart if I heard that. So I'm just going to go ahead and believe that's true.
I'll let someone from the room tell you that. I don't want to be responsible for crushing your spirit.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the other things that we've got here, another one of the quotes that I really like, is he talks about the power of the commonplace. He says it's possible in a poem or a short story to write about commonplace things and objects using commonplace but precise language, and to endow those things, a chair, a window curtain, a fork, a stone, a woman's earring, with immense, even startling power. And I love that he's finding power in very commonplace things. And rather than, again, looking to the grandiose, he wants to look at the small details. And it's those details that are going to have the most profound impact on us. And sometimes they're pretty small. Like he says, a woman's earring. There can be several stories written about a woman's earring with a lot of power invested in it. Think of family heirlooms, things of that nature. These things have power, emotional power, and I like that he's encouraging writers to really kind of tap into that.
Make sure I'm getting this name right. O. Henry, is that right? The Gift?
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah, The Gift, or The Gift of the Magi, or the poor couple want to give each other a gift, and so he sells his beloved pocket watch to get enough money to buy a comb for her beautiful hair, and she has her hair cut and sells it so she could buy a watch fob for his beloved watch. And so they each give gifts that are no longer useful to one another. But the real story is their love was so great that they would sacrifice the things they love for each other. And there you're dealing with, a watch, a type of hair comb, and a poor couple, which is just everyday stuff. But there was a great story in that. Boy, I hope I have the name right on that. I didn't know I was going to be talking about that. But very touching and all commonplace things. So I can see that. I can see that point.
What is it? Star Trek 4, where the voyage home, where they come back to the 80s or whatever it is, and Kirk picks up at an antique store a pair of Benjamin Franklin's bifocals or something like that. I haven't watched that movie in forever, but just kind of the idea of the story and the history of that, like, they're eyeglasses. He used them to read.
All right.
He created them, sure, bifocals, but just the power that those commonplace objects have, some of those antiques, the stories they have. If these walls could talk, well, walls are pretty mundane, ordinary things, but
Sure.
they have their stories to tell as well. So finding that, and I would encourage you in your stories, one way that you could really ratchet things up, I think, especially in short fiction, but it works in novels too. Find a small prop, a small set piece, and find a way to give it some power. Have it play a larger role in the story. And what you'll find is that can have a pretty profound impact on the reader.
I once wrote a short story, horrible piece of work, but you got to get your first words down sometime. And it was all based on a penny that changed the life of every person that touched it. There was sort of a Twilight Zone aspect to it, and I wrote that when I was a very young man, and I don't know where it is, and I wouldn't pick it up if I did. It was that bad, but nonetheless, I at least recognize that there can be a great power in something very, very simple, and we do that as humans. We imbue authority, we imbue great value to something that's very common. I mean, who wouldn't want a quill from the signing of the Declaration of Independence? I mean, that would be incredibly valuable. But it's a feather, plucked from a duck, and it's really nothing more than that. But the fact of who used it and what it was used to sign makes all the difference in the world. Or Lincoln's silk top hat, worth tons of money. It's in the Smithsonian, but it's just an old top hat. It doesn't matter because of what surrounds that object. So yeah, there's great power in objects. Alrighty.
So I think the internet was kind of bogging down there because you really came up that, or you just got drunk really fast. The power.
Yeah, I think
that's what I heard.
No. I think there's some bandwidth stuff going on here, so hopefully it's not that way.
Definitely.
When it's being recorded, but if it is, it's done over the internet. Let's talk a little bit about the next thing. This other quote that begins, "That's all we have." Talk to us a little bit about that.
He says, "That's all we have, finally, the words, and they'd better be the right ones, with the punctuation in the right places, so that they can best say what they are meant to say. If the words are heavy with the writer's own unbridled emotions, or if they are imprecise and inaccurate for some other reason, if the words are in any way blurred, the reader's eyes will start to slide right over them and nothing will be achieved." And I like that. It's just, again, a little quote. I don't have much to say because he's just said it so well. But ultimately, what do you have to affect the reader? You've got your words. That's it. You've got words and punctuation. So make sure they're right. Just the importance that he places on them. Not just the words choice, but also the word order, and how you want them to convey what you want them to convey. Really, really like that. For me, that's really inspiring. One thing that Carver did is he would have these 3x5 cards that he would hang up around his office, just full of writing quotes that inspired him. And for me, I've always wanted to do that. And if I did, this is definitely one of those quotes that would be up there. I'd have several of these up here about the power of the commonplace, but also this one. That's all we have, finally, the words, and they'd better be the right ones with the punctuation in the right places. I like his focus on precision and accuracy. It's a very technical way to talk about writing, but we need to think about our fiction in technical terms, like a machine. You want all the pieces in the right places so that they can do their jobs right.
We sometimes get it backwards. I do love this quote. Sometimes when I'm working with new writers, I encounter those whose goal is to be a writer, not to tell a story, not to communicate, but they want to be called a writer. And I'm thinking that's the wrong way. If you don't love the story, then being a writer isn't going to help you. You have to love that power of communication. And a great many people, and this is a sad thing, the great many people do not understand the power of words. It used to be that words made the person. A single speech, I mentioned this last week, from William Jennings Bryan in 1896, made him the youngest person ever to run for president. He delivered a great speech. It was so moving, his party nominated him to run for president. That's one speech, and the guy had only been in the Senate a short time. So, I'm thinking of the great sermon, "Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God." I mean, that's brutal. And sometimes we think that the person giving that, Jonathan Edwards, was a fire and brimstone preacher. He wasn't. He was had bad eyesight, so he stood behind the pulpit and he leaned over his pulpit and he held the papers close to his face so that he could read. He didn't move at all. He thought that was bad form to do. But the words were so strong and so moving, people had panic attacks in the church. So there's a great deal of power in the spoken word and the written word, and it is certainly true in fiction too. Fiction can and has changed the world. So it matters a lot about getting the craft right, and I hope someday to write a well-crafted story. I'm never quite happy. I get close, and then I go, well, it could have been better, and so I keep trying.
Well, we need to think of our story in terms of craft, but we also need to think of our sentences even, and obviously those build together to make paragraphs and paragraphs, pages. I think one of the things that people tend to do, these new writers, as you say, or beginning writers, even experienced writers, they've got a great story that they want to tell. It's a great story, but their prose is inefficient or inexpedient at best. And finding the right vocabulary, which Carver would agree with Stephen King about trying to overreach for particular words, and he would say, don't overreach, just use the words that come naturally, because those are probably the words that are going to best communicate your ideas. So he's very much a no frills kind of writer. And because of that, he refused to use melodrama. He never sensationalized anything because he wanted his writing to be accurate and precise. And I don't think you can really have accurate, precise language if you're sensationalizing things and making them bigger than they really are. Instead, just imbue them with that power, that emotional power. And so, yeah, seek to always be efficient with your writing.
Well, we are getting close to the bottom of the hour. Go ahead and talk a little bit, if you would, Aaron, about Carvers Menace. So you got another great quote there.
Yeah, Carvers Menace is the name of my fantasy football team. Every fantasy football team that I've had since I read this essay has been called Carvers Menace. But he says, I like it when there's some feeling of threat or a sense of menace in short stories. And again, you want to talk about the precision of language, menace, like that is the exact word that you want. There has to be tension, a sense that something is imminent, that certain things are in relentless motion, or else most often there simply won't be a story. And you've talked, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast, but this idea of the ticking clock, that things are in motion, that things are moving whether you like it or not. There's got to have that tension. that Menace, he talks about a husband and a wife having coffee that can be filled with tension. If the stakes are high enough, this might be the marriage on the line, and nothing bad has to happen. They may just drink their coffee in silence and then go on about their day. But we, the reader, you can write about that scene in such a way that we, the reader, are terrified of what might happen. We have to feel as if the woman might throw her steaming hot coffee in the man's face. We have to feel that the man may become, he's going to flip the table, or whatever the case may be, or that she'll finally get so fed up she'll walk out on him, or that he'll finally confess that he knows that she's been cheating on him, or whatever the case may be. There's got to be something at stake. And even though they may never, ever do anything, we need to have that sense of menace, that something is imminent, something big can happen, and probably will. This is, what is it, Chekhov's gun on the wall, or over the mantle, this sense of foreboding that something terrible might happen.
You're right. That is a well drafted sentence, menace. And if you'd use the word a sense of danger, it would be less of an impact than a sense of menace.
Carver's danger just doesn't sound nearly as strong,
Right. That's true. And who would name a fantasy football, team Carver's Danger?
Not me. Not me at all. So,
all right, buddy. We have come down to the bottom of the half hour there. Any last things we want to talk about?
Well, I do want to encourage everyone to tune in next week. We will be doing the same thing, or at least we should be, unless we get popular opinion that says, no, don't do it anymore. Perhaps this was a colossal failure. I don't know. But if all goes well, and if this is well received, we should be talking about F. Scott Fitzgerald next week and what he had to say to writers.
Oh, that sounds great. You got another essay from him? Is that it, or?
I have some letters that he wrote. I'm going to double check it, but I want to say to his daughter, who also was a writer and pursued writing as a career, and pursued her education in writing, and he had some things to say to her. So a lot of it's borrowed from those letters that he wrote to her and to some other writers that had written to him for advice. So some really interesting stuff there too. Nice. Yeah, that's going to be good. Absolutely. Well, Aaron, how do folks get hold of you and stay up with all that you're doing? AaronGansky.com. Also, you can find me on the Facebook and the Twitter. Go ahead and friend me and follow me, and put some information out there. But AaronGansky.com is the best way to find out what I'm doing. August 25th, The Hand of Adonai releases, so I'm eagerly anticipating that and looking forward to that. So I should have some stuff going up on Facebook soon about book launch teams and things of that nature. If you're interested in being a part of that, you can contact me through that. And Molly Jo and I are working on that together. So it should be fun. And how can people get in touch with you, Pops? Well, I'm pretty well hunkered down these days working on things, but still my website, which is pretty stagnant most of the time, but you can find information out about things there at altongansky.com. And I am on Twitter, and I'm also on Facebook and all the other social media, though I'm not as active as perhaps I should be, mostly because I'm hunkered down working on stuff. So, sometimes you have to decide if you're going to be a writer of social media or if you're going to be a writer of books. And I tend to lean towards the books kind of thing. So, but I try to be good about friending people, and I try to be very good about same thing with Twitter and following those things. And Blue Ridge has a Twitter account too. It's just the BRMCWC, Blue Ridge Mountain Christian Writers Conference. You can also see what's going on with writing there, because we're always writing about writing. So. Excellent. Writing about writing. I love it. Writing about writing. So, well, we thank you all for listening, and until next week, good writing.